So after sitting down and watching the first 3 episodes of Andor Season 2, I decided to jump back onto Twitter for the first time in over 4 months and just gauge the general fan reaction, see how people enjoyed the episodes. And other than my feed suddenly being full of all kinds of right-wing accounts, which had never happened before, I found that a lot of people really enjoyed the episodes, which is again an opinion that I really shared. I thought the first 3 episodes were a fantastic setup. There were some great moments in there. But as always, there are the usual suspects who really enjoy creating controversial opinions because they need attention, they need to drive, the audience to their dying channels, and they grift for a living. So it wasn't a surprise to see people who, are quite well known in the Star Wars fandom, put out these opinions. And specifically this time around, it's over one of the darker aspects of these first 3 episodes, and something that Star Wars on the live screen has never been so direct and visceral with. And I'm just going to say it because it's what it was, and it's where Bix was almost raped in the 3rd episode by the Imperial officer. Again, it made a lot of people uncomfortable, and it left people asking the question, was that necessary? Now, that's what I want to address here in this video, is my take on, was it necessary? And to kind of address some of the more outlandish and controversial claims about where this fits into the Star Wars universe. Now, again, I think that you have to be very, very careful when you delve into any kind of content that involves sexual assaults, because it is something that people experience in real life. It is a very sensitive topic, and again, you have to tread very, very carefully. Now, we have never outright seen any kind of sexual assaults in a Star Wars show, certainly not in the way that this was detailed. And by all means, I could see it coming from the 2nd episode. When we're introduced to that Imperial officer, you get those creepy vibes. You get the vibes that he's trying to, work his way in to Bix's mind to determine whether she's vulnerable, does she have a partner? And when he finds out that she does, he backs off, only to return in the 3rd episode, ramp up that creepiness and outright try to assault her, leading to her killing him, which, again, is part of the story. It's part of the larger kind of narrative that this happens, the Empire mistreats the vulnerable because they have power, and that's the message behind it. Now, it made people uncomfortable because no one wants to see that. And the good news is that if you found that made you uncomfortable, that's good, because that means that you recognize that it's wrong and you have, at the very least, a decent moral center when it comes to sexual assault and people being abused. So the intent of the scene was to make you feel uncomfortable, and if you felt uncomfortable, then that is a good reaction. That's the reaction you should be having. So I'm not going to sit here and say that everyone should have been okay with it. You should have found the scene, as okay as a space battle. It's not something that you're supposed to just pass over. You're supposed to recognize that this is something a bit different. This is something more visceral and more disturbing than what you've seen before. And it's okay to have those moments in shows that really stand out to make a point. Now, people are saying that, well, Star Wars has never done this before. Star Wars has never had sexual assault, so it should never have it going forward. And I disagree with that point on a couple of, avenues. Firstly, whilst we've never had an outright attempt to rape or sexually assault someone on screen, there are plenty of instances where sexual assault is referenced or inferred. Now, the most obvious one is from Return of the Jedi, with Leia being tied up, put into a slave outfit, and having to serve at the whim of a giant slug monster. That is very much implying that there is a sexual assault element to it. It doesn't play it off on screen outright because, again, it's a film aimed towards a younger audience. It is a fantasy movie, and it doesn't have the time to go in depth into that part of, the narrative. So it's there just as a visual guide. And again, I'm sure that there was a marketing idea behind it, but the intent is to show that Leia is being controlled and mistreated, and her body is on show because that's a way of abusing her. That's a way of pushing her down. There are other instances. Twi'leks, for the longest time, have been treated as slaves. There's references in lore that Twi'leks used to sell their women because that's the only commodity that they used to have. And you will see them acting as strippers, acting as dancers in a lot of different Star Wars media. So there is always that sexualization and the potential for that to be taken advantage of in the Star Wars realm. It's not been done in depth. This is the first time that we have physically seen something so disturbing on screen, so I understand that people are a little off-put by that. And again, that's a fine reaction to have. If you don't want to see it, that's your opinion, that's fine. I don't necessarily think it was wrong for it to be portrayed, because it served a deeper meaning. Now, when we look at the scene itself, it is to show you that the Empire at all levels is morally abusive. They are corrupt, and they will use the power they have to their advantage. From the lowly lieutenants trying to, again, abuse young women, to the highest of senior commanders destroying a planet to make a point, killing billions of people. This is what I try to refer to when people say the Empire wouldn't condone that, or Vader wouldn't condone that. They absolutely would, because that reflects real-life authoritarianism. They don't care what happens down at the lowest levels, as long as the populace is subjugated. They will happily turn another cheek, turn a blind eye to anything going on at those levels, so long as the plans of the Empire are not impacted. And Vader is very much the same. The man who kills children, who force-choked his own wife, he is not going to stop at sexual assault. He's not going to sit there and say, hey guys, I think we've gone too far now. Again, as long as his plans are not interrupted, there's no evidence to say that he would ever step in and stop a soldier from abusing a civilian. I've certainly never seen it myself. Again, the only time that you would ever do that with Vader is if the person has some significance to him, or it's going to disrupt his own plans. So I don't buy that aspect of the Empire wouldn't do this, and it's a little creepy that you're trying to defend what is essentially space Nazis and their behaviours, trying to instill some kind of moral elements, like a limit to their behaviour. There is no limit to the Empire's behaviour with the Emperor at the helm. And Andor itself does try to show us that not everyone in the Empire is evil. Some of them are just people doing their jobs, and that's fine. I'm not saying that everyone in the Empire would, sexually assault someone. But what I am saying is that the structure of that government and that military is set up so that the people who would do that are not punished. And so the people at the lowest rungs, the undocumented immigrants, are the ones to suffer. And the reason that they did that, and Tony Gilroy has said this, is because it reflects real life. That is happening out there right now. And you might feel uncomfortable with that. Unfortunately, that's just another aspect of morality. It's not right, but it does happen. And to deny that is to be deluded. And to say that you don't want your Star Wars shows to reflect real life, again, is not realistic, because Star Wars, in many different facets, reflects real life. Andor has taken the avenue of being darker and grittier and following those darker and grittier elements of real life. Now, the movies, The Mandalorian, all these other shows, they are aimed towards younger audiences, young teens, children, and adults, but they won't touch on those elements because that is too heavy for a young audience. Andor has taken a different approach. Andor is specifically aimed at that more mature audience, and it's never tried to pretend otherwise. The first season, we've seen it right the way through with how the Empire abuses its citizens. The revolt on Ferrix was the result of that. And so this second season, it's going further to try and show you that as time progresses, and as both sides start to really heat up, both the rebellion and the Empire's reaction to the rebellion, things get worse. And this is a symptom of that. Now, just because it's never been displayed before doesn't mean you can't have it again going forward. It has to be done very, very carefully. Because again, people who have suffered through this kind of abuse, they will have flashbacks to that trauma. And I do agree that one of the things they should have done was to have had a warning ahead of the episode to say, this episode will contain some disturbing scenes. And so people who don't want to see that because of their own experiences can opt to, not watch. But I could see from the second episode, from the vibes that they were giving, that given the chance, that lieutenant would absolutely try and take advantage of Bix, and that's what happened. And that is, again, from the perspective of the story, trying to show you why this rebellion ends up rising up to defeat the Empire, because the people at the very bottom, the very vulnerable, are abused by the powerful. And Bix is just an unfortunate example there, but she rises above. She kills him. But again, take into consideration the subtext of the scenario as well. There is a trooper outside the door, the open door, who can hear Bix's screams, and he doesn't react. It's only when the commander starts to scream and is in distress that he reacts. So it is very clear from the subtext that this is a common occurrence and something that is accepted as part of the Empire. And so for people saying that the Empire wouldn't condone this, there is no proof to back that up. The Empire does not have a moral limit. And to say so without the evidence is disingenuous, I think. Or it's just maybe just to try and create a controversial point so that you get many, many views on your dying channel. But I think that the way that it was done was exactly what was needed for that scenario. Bix struggles, she fights back, she kills him. And now she has another element of trauma to add into everything that's already happened to her. She is kind of an amalgamation of everything that the Empire does wrong. She's been tortured. She's almost been raped. She's lost her loved ones to the Empire because of their oppression. She's had to leave her home behind. She is the pinnacle of what the rebellion is fighting against. The experiences that they're pushing back against. And I think that it was done very well. I get why people are uncomfortable with it. I get some people might not want that in the show, and that is fair. That's a valid opinion, but not because the Empire wouldn't do it, but because you're just not comfortable seeing those kinds of scenes. That's fine. But the Empire is absolutely capable. Just because we have not seen it outright on screen before in Star Wars doesn't mean that Star Wars can't go there again. It's the right setting for it. Andor is that show to do that, and they do it so well. And that's about the diversity of the universe. This is what we need for Star Wars to progress. Because if we're going to get shows, if we're going to get so much more content and lore, we need to delve into those darker aspects at the right times. We can have our whimsical fantasy adventures with Jedi and the Sith and, all of the flyboys out there like Han Solo. But we also need to have that grounded, realistic element that sets the scene for the entire stage. That gives us that world-building element to show why the Empire was so evil. So I think it was the right thing. I don't think it was something out of character for Star Wars. And again, done correctly, it can be a valuable story tool. But the lesson here is ignore the people who are making those controversial opinions because they're just doing it to get attention. Because if they truly believed that the Empire wouldn't do that, if they truly have deluded themselves into believing that the Empire has some kind of a moral limit, then either they're incapable of understanding the stories of the Empire, or maybe they sympathise with them. And that's a scarier thought.